First of all, welcome everybody, and also welcome Jonathan. It's so nice to have you here around us, giving a lecture. I want to say thank you to the doctorate school because without them it wouldn't be possible to do this. And I will say a few words how the lecture will be structured. Jonathan will present for like 45-60 minutes, and then there will be a little Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, just fire at him. You can get all the answers today. And I have the pleasure to introducing briefly Jonathan and his work. Jonathan Tuckey is the founder of Tuckey Design Studio. It's, I would say, a London-based studio, but also has a kind of small base in Switzerland and Tokyo as well. The studio turned 25 years this year, so it's a big number celebrating. There was a big celebration, I heard. His architecture is focusing on the existing structures and spaces and how to repurpose them and transfer them to modern life without losing the character. So it's a constant dialogue between old and new elements. And the portfolio is immense, and it's not just in the UK, but there are several projects in France, Italy, Germany, Switzerland, and Norway. I might miss Austria, sorry. But we will see some projects, so I will just hand it over to Jonathan, and we're ready to dive into your architecture.
Thank you, Balázs, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's my first trip to Hungary and first trip to this city, so landed a few hours ago, and it's very nice to be here. I think I probably will sit down, but if that feels uncomfortable, I'll stand up again. But we've decided I wanted to call this building on the built. I guess that seems to resonate with the work that I set up the studio to do. As Balázs said, it was set up 25 years ago to focus specifically on altering existing buildings. My background is not architecture. I studied anthropology, and I found myself almost by accident in architecture, and I've always felt more comfortable working with existing buildings and changing them rather than starting with new buildings. And so it's that 25-year journey that we are on, and I'm going to kind of show you a few projects that have marked the way along that. I think the first thing I want to say is that I think if you think of buildings or villages or towns, they, to me, are more static than culture. The act of making them means that they are slow, they are expensive, and they are very intensive to build. And therefore, as a result of that, they're very massive, they're very heavy, they're very expensive to alter or remove. And in sort of opposite to that, if you think of culture as the beliefs or social norms or material traits of a group, culture is a living thing. Culture is restless. Culture is constantly needs to be accommodated. It needs to find a space for its transaction, for its celebration, for its speculation. And so culture is always changing. And in contrast to buildings, the wishes, needs, and desires of culture is constantly looking for ways in which those buildings will need to change. And so whether it's shopping, religion, karaoke, skateboarding, parking, these cultures are always in flux, and the buildings that surround them are not so easy to take away and replace with a new one. And so therefore, the buildings around them necessarily need to adapt to accommodate the culture that requires the change of it. So it's the buildings that require us as the evolving cultures to build on the built. It's those buildings that require us to constantly look at how our existing buildings can change and accommodate us. So it's through this filter, it's through that way of looking at the world that I want to show you 5 projects carried out by our studio. They are projects that I think show how we as architects and designers have a responsibility to work with the buildings that we have. And in doing that, we have an opportunity to develop a language of architecture that is what I call mongrel or hybrid. It's a language of architecture that is only exists because it is collaborating with something else. And so that to me has always been quite an exciting opportunity of the architect of the reused building, is that you're like making a dance with a new partner each time, and therefore it requires different solutions and different architectural languages at each opportunity. So the first building I'm going to show is a hotel that we worked on and made in Berlin maybe 8 years ago, something like that. Its location is in the east of the city, in Kreuzberg. The River Spree is here. This is the road that goes to Warsaw, so this is called Warschaustrasse. So the road and the railway line that runs to Poland is here, and the building is an urban block on that road. It was built in the existing building. The building that we started with was built in 1921 as a cigarette factory. This is a typology that I think, for having had 2 hours in Budapest, I recognise is going to be very familiar to people in Hungary, but is quite alien or quite unusual to see for a London architect. It's a building typology which, as you'll know better than me, uses up the full width of the plot. It builds to the limits of the plot, and then creates these courtyard spaces within the middle of it. I've always found it, when we first got the opportunity to look at this, I always found it quite intriguing, because it converts, by building to the edge of the plot, it converts what you think of as only a front and back, where you get 2 sides of light, to one where you get 6 facades. So I think it's quite a beautiful discovery, the Hof, the courtyard building. But this was the building that we were given with. This is the building that had already been used as a hotel, and we were being asked to add new rooms to the upper levels of the existing hotel. The character of the building was uninterrupted floor plates. So effectively, it was a warehouse before, so just single open floor plates. And to us, it felt like the form of it was rather like a kind of grand public house for the city. When we're working with existing buildings, we find it very useful to think of what the building is trying to be. So we try and understand what its prototype is. It helps us. That strategy helps us not to worry about whether we like something or dislike something, which I think is a very unhelpful position to put yourself in. Liking is irrelevant. Disliking is irrelevant. It's more interesting to try and understand something rather than decide whether you like it or dislike it. And if you think of the prototype to us, or a prototype of the grand public house in the city, is a palazzo in Florence, a residence which contains both commercial and public functions. So on the left is the Palazzo Medici Riccardi, a 17th century building in Florence. It is centered around a large courtyard, which acts as a kind of arrival space for anyone visiting that building. It acts as a focus to the whole building, and it's around that central space that all the rooms are arranged. And to us, we felt that conceiving the concept, the idea of a hotel as a public palace might capture the sense in which the hotel is both responsibility for the public life of Berlin. It's a little model we started to make of the courtyard as we were developing these early ideas for the project. Another reference for us, another prototype of this type of building was this building in Cairo, the Wicala Caravanserai, also built from the 1500s. This building was developed to accommodate visiting merchants to the city. It was a prototypical hotel, and it was essentially arranged around an open courtyard, and on the lower levels was accommodation for animals and storage at the ground levels, and then as it went up higher it became rooms for guests above. And we liked the almost theatrical quality of being seeing through from one corner to another corner, seeing from one room to another, and being seen. The sort of sense of voyeurism that has quite a critical beauty in a courtyard building, and felt like it could be appropriate and interesting in a hotel context. So, crashing from Cairo to Florence back to Berlin again. This is the actual building. So we're out of the prototype and into the real building. And as I said, you can see the large uninterrupted floor plan made possible by these rather beautiful curved beams that spanned from front to back, from side to side of the building. It had a very high ceiling height, which we knew which felt perfect for an open plan space, but immediately we're going to start to have to chop it up into rooms is going to suddenly make unpleasant, maybe even tall spaces. So this is a concern of ours. But it also had these enormous windows, particularly to the interior courtyard, from knee height to ceiling height windows, which was perfect for making cigarettes, but less intimate for standing there having a shower or in your bathroom. So when you're making a change of use of one building type to another building type, you can't just ignore, you have to kind of understand where the building has come from in order to think about how it's going to change. And this is some people making cigarettes in a different building, but nonetheless one that probably would have had a similar character. Across this is the hotel here. So the hotel looks across this very, very quite large, expansive landscape of railway tracks, quite almost desolate landscape. And in amongst it, just opposite our first view from these rooms, was this very sweet little signal box that sits over the top of the U-Bahn. We found it really nice. We were just talking, looking at it, and we suddenly realized, it's a very lovely, it sits on top of the train. You can see the train passes underneath it. And it seemed to us to almost be a piece of furniture within the landscape, a piece of urban furniture within the scale of the city. It seemed to allow us to mediate between the scale of the person and the scale of the city. And I guess was a clue, or was a assisting reference for us as to how we could think about subdividing these big open floor plates within the interior. I don't know. Every architect in London uses this as a reference for us. Sometimes we find it as an excuse to use it for every project we ever use. But it's a beautiful painting. It happens to be by Antonello de Messina, it is in the National Gallery in London, and it seems to, in this case, it did seem to answer for us a way in which we could place domestic objects within larger spaces as something that could mediate between the scale of the individual and the scale of the large volume. It's also by I think South American Doris Salcedo, a sculptor, an artist who makes these wonderful pieces of furniture that also have this transition in scale, and they were kind of useful starting points for us to think about how we would work with this large open floor plate. So here's some drawings of the proposal. You can see we've started to divide the room up around that central courtyard. We've started to occupy the courtyard with the activities that we think a public room should have. On the scale of the room, just about visible in this image, you'll see some proportions where we start to use the classic bottom, middle, and top in order to somehow allow this generous ceiling height to be occupied. And then at the top of those spaces, some perforate nature that allows your views through, or your apparent views through, so that you can still see the structure and the sense of open. We make a lot of models in the studio, so these are 1 to 20, 1 to 25 cardboard and timber models, which allow us to test and develop the proposal. And you can start to see in this proportioning system a language that maybe has come from that railway box, but perhaps feels industrial for the building. Shutters and things like that to mediate between the large windows and the room interior. So still making open plan as much as we could, maybe removing the conventional relationship between bedroom and bathroom that we have in a hotel to make the room as large as we could, but having screens and devices to subdivide it. And then a few pictures to show you the building completed. These are the rooms. The client couldn't believe it when they said, it looks exactly like the model. We said, well, that's why we make the model. So you can see these are the different spaces within a palette of timber, different timbers, different plywoods, clay plasters, and resin floors. And the courtyard in its sort of occupied mode now is a place for music events, for performances, for city markets and things like that. So it really has become this room within the city, a public room for the city that then the courtyard rooms look out onto. So next project I want to show you is a house in the west of England, in Cornwall, which is a district. It's a part of the UK which is the furthest west. So it's a kind of peninsula that goes out into the ocean. It gets the most amount of rain in the UK, and it's kind of this landscape is the site for the building. The actual building is this little red dot here. That's the coast. The coastline is up here, so it's not on the coast, but it's very close to these quite dramatic cliffs and a dramatic coastline. Gets very, very sort of strong winds. All the trees are at sort of one angle, and this is a project which is the actual project was a restoration and an alteration of a house for a fisherman's house in that part of England. But it was actually a project about trying to go backwards rather than go forwards. We often find that when a building comes to us, it's had lots of work done to it, which we are almost having to take away to find the building again. So it was not, with the first project there was nothing there, we started to build things, whereas this one we actually had to strip things away in order to find the original building. So here is the evolution of the building over 200 years. Starts as a two-room building here, very typical of buildings of this nature. Then becomes a four-room building, then becomes a four-room building with two outbuildings here, and then those outbuildings all get meshed together, so it becomes a mess or a conglomerate. I don't know if this is the case in Hungary, but it's certainly the case in the UK. Old buildings don't have corridors. The corridor gets invented I think the corridor gets invented in the UK. It's not a good invention, I have to say. I'm not proud of it. But it gets invented, I think, in about 1800, 1850, in order for people to get from one room to another without interrupting a conversation. So it's the beginning of a sort of class system arrives through the corridor. And so you get this classical plan of room to room to room to room. The corridor arrives as a way to get from that room to that room without interrupting the activities. And yeah, arguably, it creates a whole lot more problems because you end up getting these rooms where no one goes into. Anyway, that's an aside effect. This building didn't have corridors, and many buildings of this age don't have corridors. And so you can see you're walking from space to space to space like this. I guess this is our sort of strategy for the proposal. We make more explicit the way in which the building has evolved, because that seemed to have just been concealed in modern plaster all over, and so you didn't know what was old, you didn't know what was new, you didn't know the whole thing was not legible. And so our proposal in this was to try and reconstruct this idea of the outbuildings and the house and the outbuildings being these separate structures, which had a going to be interior, but it has a sense of a link between the old and the new. So emphasize almost that you're passing from the original building to a new part. That was the strategy. And you can start to see, in this model, we start to suggest a different materiality between the old and the new. And in the proposals, you'll start to see that a little bit more. This part of Cornwall has a very particular artistic tradition that emerges in the beginning of the 20th century. It's on the north coast of Cornwall, and it becomes a kind of artist enclave from about 1920, 1930. People escaping the city, people looking for inspiration in the landscape, 1920s, 1930s, Ben Nicholson, Alfred Wallace, a group of British modernists end in this very remote part of Cornwall. And they're attracted to it because of the sea, the connection to nature, but also because it's on the north coast, facing north, they've always got this light behind them. And so everyone is always talking about it as being a very particular quality of light. So sort of almost in the DNA, in the landscape around, there was the sense of a creative community. And one of the person whose paintings I'm showing here is a painter called Alfred Wallace. He became part of this group that emerges at that 20s and 30s, well, 40s and 50s maybe. And he's of a school of naive painters. He starts his life as a fisherman, and so he doesn't go to art school. He becomes a painter through his inspiration rather than his training, and galvanizes a group of people around him. Simple materials, painting on board, using found objects, capturing very much the motion and movement of the seas. Here are some drawings. On the left are the existing amalgam of buildings. On the right is the before and after. So this is before and this is after. You can see we're starting to separate the materiality of the new building versus the old building. We remove the plaster from the new building. The extensions we make to the new building we make in a different material. And we take a bit of inspiration from the art of that period in the 1940s of Ben Nicholson, and the collaging of different media, tones and forms to create a sort of single comprehensive collage. I often think of working with existing buildings as like making a collage, because in a way it's like you've been handed something and you've got to then layer on top of it, and I think we find that as a useful analogy sometimes when we know how to start. Here are the plans of the first floor and the ground floor on the left, first floor on the right. So we have in this building bedrooms on 2 floors, and on the upper level bedrooms. So because it was a holiday apartment, a holiday house for a family, they needed quite a few bedrooms. So this separation allows the program to function where the ground floor bedrooms aren't as public as they would be with this route through. And some images of the house, one side where you can't see anything particularly new, the other side where you see the new buildings or the stripped back buildings, continuing the roof form of the old, but in a new materiality. Here's a model of the building here, the new building on the left, the new building on the right, the old building on the right, the new building on the left, and a sense of what they look like together. And then within the interior, this entrance space, which allows you to kind of, for the first time, read. This would have been an exterior wall at some points before it had the additions added to it. So bringing the exterior elements to feel more present in the space. I quite like, this is a before and after of one particular space. So you can see before we had very, very low ceilings. Above them were very small attics, but literally the photograph taken from the same place, 2 years apart, just by lifting up that ceiling. And we wanted to, the project was also about improving the thermal performance of this old stone building. And we found when we found the stonework, we were disappointed when we saw the stonework that we were going to have to cover it up with plaster, and it was just going to lose this organic nature of the building. So we decided to spray on a cork insulation, which almost accentuates the organic nature of the walls. So they almost feel like, the walls almost feel like a fabric. And that then becomes almost exacerbated when you start to place doors within that structure. So it feels like the structure's older than we've almost made it older in its appearance than it was. And then you get these quite nice moments where there's a gap between the wall and there, which is now a piece of glass. So when that door is closed and when the shutter's closed at the top, light comes down on either side of it, so that you know someone's in the room, but you can't see into the room. It makes it feel open plan, but not. And a new staircase, which was we looked at library stairs or stairs that get onto boats, and just wanted something that almost felt like a piece of furniture that was slid into the side of the room, hugging the building, working with the organic shapes and forms of the plaster, and how lovely it was to see light coming around these new forms by those windows starting to then be curved where they had previously been straight. It starts to mean that light comes in and almost like you're seeing light for the first time. It sort of curves very gently around the surfaces of windows or floors or doors or walls. The structure was kept exactly as we found it, where we had to work closely with the structural engineer to strengthen it with timber plates or steel plates where necessary. So it's tricky with structural engineers. They often want to take that away and put a new structure in. And that was an important collaboration with them to retain and work with the structure that we had. And another room, I love the way the carpenter just cut these boards to work perfectly with the walls, and it almost becomes like you're on a boat or you're in the sea. Okay, we're back into London, and a project that is also a new building, and This is this is the first new building, I suppose. The other two have been working with existing buildings. This is, I think, this is a project for us that was about building in being looking very closely to the context of the what's around you. It was one of the first times we'd done a new building where, as I said at the beginning, we were focused very much on working with existing buildings. And so there are some elements of this that were kept from before, but mainly it was a new construction. There's a strange irony, maybe for all of us, that despite the intentions of our profession to change our cities, that the biggest period of master planning in London, maybe in Budapest also, was by the Second World War, not by architects at all, but by a kind of imposition of bombing around the city. And London's particular character of having social housing in spaces that you would never expect it to see it is, it's not come through our own master planning, it's come through external master planning. And it produces a very beautiful character to the city, because it doesn't ever become ghettoized because it was randomly selected like that. During the war, these extraordinary maps were made of London, which show the destruction, and each of them have a date of when something landed. And so black, the little black dots on the houses are when there was total destruction. The pink is when it was damaged beyond repair, like these ones here. The red is where it was seriously damaged but probably could be repaired. And then the orange is where it was minor damage. So we've got these atlases in our studio, and you look at them, and just whenever you go to a site beforehand, it's just a really interesting journey to think, I'm almost know what I'm going to see just from the street by this bombing map of the 5 years of the war in London. And our site is up here. Very small, I'm afraid, but there is a street which one side of the street and the buildings around it, but the other side of the street will be fine. I don't have any pictures of it, but this is an archive picture of something that might be similar. Essentially, literally just lands. It would be a strange morning to wake up this side of the street to think how, but nonetheless, these things just landed and just took out 6 or 7 buildings. And so this is the gap. The gap like this is our site. The project was for a house, and in a way, it was trying to work out what is the context of this gap. What context do we have around us? Aldo Rossi obviously talks extensively about the city as having a collective memory, and the memory of events being really held within the streets and within the bricks of those streets. And so it's interesting to think of the opportunities of a site like this as being both understanding what's around it, but also understanding its context in many different ways. This is the actual street. This is the buildings that survived on the other side of the road. They're built in 1850s, I think, something like that. Typical London houses, 2-story buildings, and they have a very particular. This isn't in the centre of the city. This is maybe 4 miles from the centre. So the scale has become down. Everyone has a. You can see them here, little houses with a little garden. It's like what English call a little castle. So you've got every English person has a castle. So this is the house and this is the garden, and then and our site here is this red one, this red L shape here. Not the pink, but the red bit. The pink is the buildings. The pink is the buildings we're seeing here. And I guess, so in a way, we're trying to understand what the rhythm of this site is. You can almost see, a bit like music or something, the rhythm of that street working its way down. There's a sort of 4 metre by 4 metre by 4 metre journey from one house to another house to another house, both down the street. But there's also a rhythm at the back between the fronts of the houses and the backs of the houses. The fronts tend to be this straight line. The backs of London houses have this undulating line to get more light in, a bit like the courtyard idea. Essentially, it's a way of getting more light in. And we had a kind of unusual challenge because we had a big site to build one house, which would have normally had maybe 3 houses on it. And so we didn't want it, the client and we didn't want it to feel dominating of this street. And so it was a way of trying to find our own rhythm that respected the street, but also provided the right experience for the building of itself. So that's our site. That is literally the site from one end, from the garage of our neighbour to the next house. Would have, you could imagine 3 houses would have sat in that space. I don't know why I put that picture of weaving in there. I can't remember, but anyway, it's a nice picture of weaving. I suppose what I was talking about in there is, I think it's this idea of rhythm in a way. It's like you need the bass, and then you need a kind of the tune over the top of it. And the tune can change as long as there's a rhythm that goes with it. And I think feels to us something that we wanted to work with in terms of how we were going to divide up this quite long plot. Some drawings of the building. You can see now we're starting to divide it into these 3 sections. Maybe we like the fact that they are both one character and different characters, so they're connected but disconnected. And some sketches of how that might materialize. And again, we build a lot of models in our studio. I was talking to Martin about model making. It's a really important part of our process is to test things with models. So this is a 1 to 20 or so model in our studio, and just studying the relationship between these 3 buildings as 3 and 1 at the same time. And some sketches of what that interior might be. And volume studies of how those 3 become 1, different characters complementing one another, both independent and connected. We were interested in the idea of making the whole facade out of one type of brick, but treating the bricks in different ways, so that we almost had, again, a bit like the weaving, we almost had one line that ran through the whole building, but there was different rhythms or patterns that characterize each individual part of the building. And so this is us testing and exploring different finishes on the brick, different bonds on the brick, whether they are more like a basket or whether they're more like an open structure. And we've obviously been talking about from the outside. This strategy of 3 buildings and 1 building at the same time was also very interesting to think about from the inside. It just gave us the opportunity for different spaces of different characters. A space that's more like a barn, a space that's more like a long gallery, a space that's more like a lounge, a space even that's more like a chapel or a library. So almost like a compendium or a collage of different spaces and proportions within the existing building. And to enjoy to make a point, to make you aware when you're stepping from one building to another. We changed the level from one building to another, partly because we can then get an attic at the top, but also so that you feel like you have that almost that experience of a thief breaking into a building, almost breaking through the party wall from one space to another space as an opportunity that this long plan gave us. And here we can start to see, this is the building from the outside, the 3 buildings, this one with its perforated brickwork, this one with its bay window, you can just see the 3rd one there, and a series of the spaces inside spaces, different characters, different materials, the step from one to another. That's change in level from one to another. And yeah, there were some things that we reused from the old garages that were here, like this roof. So there were elements of reuse, but it was minor in comparison to the new building. And just creating different spaces of different scales for different activities for the people who live there. The bathrooms and the kind of the use of the exposed brickwork to emphasize some spaces feel more external than internal. And then how this new building at the back interlocked with the neighbours' walls that are around it. So this is a new garden we created that used to be an interior, becomes a garden. So the building that was completely covered before starts to create, to have breathing space, to outside spaces become, inside spaces now become outside spaces. This gallery, a first floor gallery that, because of the overlooking of the neighbours, we get this high light along the top that brings light into a space from one building to another. And then the two ends of the building in the evening, this perforated brickwork that has a stair that runs up one end, and the other side of the building, which is entrance, and this glazed studio space on the upper levels. Okay, the next project, we're jumping into Switzerland, and this is an old building built in the 1620s, and this is a project about, I suppose, restoration and adaptation, taking an old building and to make a new vernacular for an old building. You can see the three phases of the building's life here. This is how it started, or the oldest photograph we could find of it, as a building that was half stone, half timber. You can see this stone section with a timber top. This is how it was before we started. So it had lots and lots of additions to it. It was almost impossible to read the old building that was there in its new, in how it had been handed to us. And this is the restored building at the end of our journey. So it's the elements of finding that building again, elements that were new and proudly new, elements that were new that looked like they might have always been there. So some of the work we do is intending to be very obvious, and other times we work, it's meant to be quieter or meant to be more discreet. So this is the plan of the typical plan of, well, this could be all the floors. You'll see this house would have been originally for 3 families. Each family would have had a room. That would have been one family, that would have been another family, that would have been another family, and they'd have cooked together in this space. It doesn't happen anymore like this in Switzerland, but it does now. This was 400 years ago. And then they had these unusually wide corridors that were social spaces. This is like 2.5 meters wide. So for it disproportionate, I suppose, to the rooms that were off it. It was interesting that in this space, the 3 families would often, that would be made where they would socialize, where they would gather and meet. It would also be where the fires for the house would be. You would light the fire from this side, and then these would be these ovens that would sit within the room and keep the rooms clean. So there was a separation of fire from heat. So quite an interesting plan form in these old Swiss buildings. Half the building was stone, half the building was timber. So you can see the timber is where the timber is built like that. The stone building obviously is much thicker in its wall construction. In this part of Switzerland, the stone was facing the wind, which came from the north. The cold wind is from the north, so they would put the stone side on that side. The warm side would be facing the sun in the timber, and that would heat up more. So there would be this language of timber and stone, particular to this part of Switzerland. And they would put the kitchen in the stone bit because it wouldn't burn down so easily. This is the project came to us because they wanted to take this house and make it into a wine bar, 2 and 3 apartments. So a multi-family, a mixed-use building. And as you all know, that then starts to become with quite a lot of complications about acoustic separation, fire separation, because you've got people living above people partying, and you need to have a certain technical component to that. And so this becomes our strategy for insulating the building. All the red is the new, well, everything that's red in this is new, and everything is grey is existing. But you can see in the stone bit we are insulating on the inside, and in the timber bit we're insulating on the inside. This allows us to see the timber on the outside of the building, which was very beautiful, and to plaster this. So it starts to develop a language for how the new building will look. We were particularly interested in the corridor space because it was the connection between the timber and the stone part, and it had a character that we thought we wanted to celebrate. It was a space that we wanted to be a focus to the building. And we had to take the whole building apart it was because old and the new elements, and then we're left with this almost Jenga-like timber structure, and from there we're able to build back. And so in this project, everything new we made new. It was within the interior it was clearly legible that new structure, where we had one piece of timber that was good, we would keep it. Where there were 2 that needed to be new, so it becomes a splicing of old and new. Repairs that were almost made by 4 generations of different carpenters. It was interesting, the front door, when the front door got taken down, the guy who was taking it away, who was a 25-year-old carpenter, he found the mark on the inside written by his great-grandfather who had put the front door in, maybe not the original one, but maybe one back. And so there was this really nice kind of passing of trade from one generation to another, which I think in these remote communities in all over the world, but in this part of Switzerland, is the stone man. His grandfather made the stone ovens, and so there was a nice responsibility between one generation and another. And you can see the kind of old and new in these different spaces, obviously completely newly insulated in order to make the building sustain and work in this kind of harsh climate of quite high altitude Switzerland, but keeping the old panelling where we're able to, and then being quite honest about layering on new timbers to collaborate with it. The building had very, very low ceilings, and because it was a protected building, we weren't able to raise them. And we needed this acoustic separation. So we took away the floor and we made the whole floor in 10 centimetre solid timber. So that was long enough to sustain fire and acoustic separation without removing ceiling height. So it was technically quite complicated to make sure we could have a building that everyone was happy with. The people standing in the building, but also the fire department and the regulations. But where we could make, this originally was a floor here, and when it's 2 meters everywhere, it's just like too intense. So where we could persuade people to just make some spaces to lift up, it just creates opportunity for a little bit more volume. So that was opportunities for that. And in the ground floor, the Vinotech within the stone part. Have I got time for one more? This is the last project. Is that all right? Okay, last project. Sorry, I haven't been too long. This is a theatre. Balash showed me. I'm very proud it's on the poster. So I'm very glad I've included it to show you today. This is a theatre project a new building for a theatre that we made outside of London, about 1 hour outside of London, in a rural area for a school. And I think in the subject of building on the built, because it's a new building, we started to look at the whole site as an existing building in a way, an existing building to collaborate with and put a new building on top of. The site is a school in the countryside, a boarding school where people stay, and you can see it's in the kind of middle of a forest, and it was almost like a city, like a mini city in the landscape, like a village in the landscape. It was a place that had a place that you could learn, sleep, exercise, go to church, rest. The library. It had all the ingredients of a city, but in a very condensed form. And the brief from the school was to make a new theatre. And what's visible in this image here is the school was divided really into two parts by a little road, but running through, but more by a type of architecture between one side and another side. This side, there was an intention to make these buildings from the late 19th century, buildings designed for the activities that were inside them, sleeping, learning, praying, exercising. And the buildings that come afterwards on this side here were really disappointing. They were more like sheds. They were more like buildings for storage that they then put a gym inside, or they then put a classroom inside. They didn't feel considered. And our site was going to be on this right-hand side. The site for the theatre was on that right-hand side. So we felt it was a real opportunity to try and use this new building to bring the whole campus together as a new place, as a new whole, rather than these two disparate sides. The head teacher had the theatre before was in the gymnasium. So when the gymnasium was not a gymnasium, there was a theatre. So like you can imagine trying to speak, small children, pupils trying to speak, like their first experience of speaking on the stage in a gymnasium with bad acoustics was like, you'll never speak again. You're like, I'm not going to go to the stage again. So it's terrible. But and then also whenever the theatre was on, there was no gymnasium. So he said, we really need a theatre. We need a theatre because a theatre is important. If this school is a city, every city needs a theatre. Because he said a theatre is a place to experiment. It's a place to make believe. Everyone pretends there's something else in a theatre, whether you're in the audience or on the stage. It's a place to dream. It's a place to act out all the things that you're not allowed to do. You can kill someone. You can fall in love with someone. You can hate someone. This is an important civic role, the theatre. And that's why he said it can't just be a temporary building. It has to be in the heart of the school. We thought that when we made the competition, our response was to, if you're going to build a theatre, and you are true to this idea of what you believe theatre is, let's make this one building have many stages and have many uses. Because a theatre shouldn't just be, the nice curtains and things. It can be also it can be outside. It can be just a bench on the side of the building. A theatre can have many different configurations if you think broadly what theatre produces for society. In the early development, we were inspired by the Italian city. It's difficult to not think of these buildings in these ideal places as having civic responsibility, both the buildings themselves with their uses, but also the spaces between them. I mean, look at this. This is Pienza in. It's just these sequence of spaces have got the most perfect proportion that somehow draw you in and invite you to take your role as a member of the city responsibly. And we wanted this new building to draw you in that way, to create a front, to make axes between the old buildings and the new ones so that you see from one to another, to kind of act as a piece of the city fabric. This is a fantastic Irish painter that I like a lot, called Sean Scully, who makes 3 paintings and then puts them together, and they kind of, the collage makes a new whole. And I think it was helpful for us in terms of thinking about how this building would stitch the city together, stitch the school together. And some drawings of the theatre in its location, in a model and in a drawing here. You can see and we gave the building the city on the right, the school on the right had one geometry. The school on the sheds on the right had a different geometry. We gave our theatre the geometry of the ones on the right, and it helped knit things together and made these interesting spaces around it and between it. And this is it here with its new piazza or new square, and then facing south, the back of the theatre could become this arena or this amphitheatre for bigger events. We had never done a theatre before, and we suddenly realised as we were building this model that a theatre is a massive box, and it doesn't have many windows in it, and it's quite quickly becomes a shed. And we were stressed and worried about this massive box in this quite small school. And again, back to Italy, just very, very reassured by how these buildings can occupy and define edges to squares and spaces. Even a building in a single material, like this wonderful San Lorenzo facade in Florence by Michelangelo, unfinished facade, just has this, it doesn't need to be overwhelming to have one material that gradates from ground all the way up. So gave us a lot of confidence as to how this scale of this building and proportion might work in a single material. The plan, our portico at the front let me say again. Okay, every theatre has two doors, doesn't it? It has a main door. That's the one you dress up and you go in and you get excited about. It also has the back door where this is important roles to have. You don't want everyone to coming. The kids have got to learn what it feels like to go in the stage door. So we need to make the front have that sort of dignity of how special it is for the performance. But then when this is being used for an assembly, then perhaps you can just use these side doors. It can be a classroom on some days, but it can be an important space on other days. And you can start to see the kind of subdivision of the building in section. The teacher was always saying parents always arrive for these performances late, so that some of them arrive very early, but the ones who arrived late, they needed like a gallery, like a minstrel's gallery, to be able to see their child on the stage and be there. So just using these devices from medieval theatre, where the theatre is a building in the round rather than just the formal raking and seating, but also being able to get a pupil in a wheelchair on one level. So we need to make it accessible, but at the same time have the hierarchy that we think is important in theatres. We made it from cross-laminated timber. It was good because it was going to be very quick to assemble, rapid, I guess, made in this very short period in the school holidays. It's very, we know it's good for carbon, just to lock in the carbon into a timber structure. But the problem, I don't know about you, but for me, the problem with CLT, with cross-laminated timber, is it's so perfect. It just stops you having to think, because you just don't even need, you can just get this piece and just cut a hole in it. It's like, there's your window, there's your door, and it stops, it almost hijacks you from any design decisions. Whereas if you're building in bricks, or you have to think and like, what's this lintel going to be like? Whereas this looks dumb. And so we just had to start to invent ways in which we could interact with this material. This is a library, an old library in Oxford, 1520s or something like that, all made out of stone, and just helped us enormously for how we would subdivide this big material by laying things on top of it. In the UK, a lot of people make CLT buildings and then they cover it up. And it's like in a way it's a beautiful material, but so we thought if we could put things on top of it, it would you would still see it, but it would start to have something of the beauty of the proportions of this Bodleian library. And this is us subdividing it, low level, medium level, and high level, in this rhythm of of timber framing that goes on the surface of it. So this is the interior of the building. So the CLT is still there. It's just these big pieces there, but it's just got this small timber battens laid on top, which is very good for acoustics, but also I think helps break it from being this box. I mentioned it was good for it to be a theatre and a classroom, so we put windows in it, and then those windows, then you have shutters that you can close them off when it's in theatre mode. Very manual, so the pupils can do it themselves. It's not all buttons, and we wanted it to be a place that the pupils can learn about building and feel like they can interact with, like you don't have to press a button to open anything. And some images of the inside. You get these really beautiful views of the forest through here, and I often think if you're bored in a class and you're bored in the theatre or the classroom, you've still got something else to look at. So I think trying to engage the pupils in a way that isn't just about the monodirection of learning. And then as we step outside the building, you can see we've made the whole building out of this. It's a material called Varrock. It's a composite panel of timber and cement stained in red. And so there are certain vents within it that allow air naturally in and out of the building. And then you can see it just appears on that road, making a courtyard. Maybe this will work. And I think it's nice seeing the proportions of these things. The pupils seem to just sort of, they almost act. They like the scale of the individuals within the building, occupying the space. A view of the front. This portico. This is. The idea is that this is an entrance, but they can, on the days when they have a performance, they can make a poster and bring it up, and it can announce the event. So it's a ceremonial structure as well as an entrance. And how even outside on this, we just put this bench on the back of the building here, so that's just the foundations, become a bit big, so that the pupils can sit on it. But then it becomes a place where teachers are performing things, or even when they have very large performances, they happen on this side of the building. And I think that's two pupils just resting. I think that to me is a little bit of theatre. Just watching these two people just talking about how they hate the teacher or something, it feels to me as sort of part of it. Thank you.